Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Andrew. Susan, thanks for bringing this together. And thank you all for joining in today, whether you're in person or virtual. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Let's see if we can get some slides going here. And so we'll talk a little bit about intrapreneurship. I'll define it shortly. Let's start by just saying that this is creating value through innovation and growth within a larger organization. So we'll get to a slide that says that, but I will make sure to set the table here at the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. By the way, I've been around long enough to remember when this was the Mobile Entertainment Forum. We've had a lot of kind of evolution, some revolution along the way. It's a distinct pleasure to be here. As we've heard already, the topic is so critically important. It affects every single person on the planet. And we're here to chart the way forward with so many other people. And so I'd like to start with 3 questions for you. First, have you ever had a great idea and you knew it should be done, but it wasn't aligned with the priorities, at least at that time, of your organization? Have you ever had a great idea and it was aligned with the priorities of your organization, but you couldn't get the attention from others around the organization and maybe your industry, and you couldn't get the time and the effort to evaluate it? Or have you ever had a great idea? It was aligned with priorities. You got the attention and evaluation. Everybody agrees, this is a fantastic idea. We should do this. And yet you can't find the way to move ahead. I have. I see some nodding heads in the room. I suspect that a lot of people can relate to this. And when that happens, what do? How do you chart the course forward? It's critically important that we do this, whether you're part of a larger organization or whether you're part of a smaller one, but you're working with people who are in organizations like a wireless carrier or the government or a big technology provider. And to do this, we have to push the boundaries. We have to do experiments. We have to try things. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. First, I'd like to share a story with you. Because experiments sometimes lead to big insights, especially with some patience and experience. However, the story I'm going to tell you is related to not having enough patience and not having enough experience. I was about 10 years old. I went to a lake. By the way, I live in Atlanta today. I'm originally from Tennessee in the U.S. And so I went to a lake that many people near that area went to. I was with some family members at one point, and we built a campfire. Pretty simple. We fed it with branches and twigs. It was a beautiful night. The wind is rustling through the trees. The sound of cicadas can be heard. And there's the occasional splash of a fish. And I got curious. Hey, look, we have all night. What if I take this gallon milk jug right over here? It's empty. I fill it up with water. I screw on the cap, put it on top of the campfire, let the fire heat up the plastic, melt the plastic, and then see if the water will put out the fire. Simple experiment, right? I missed a couple of things along the way. But I was watching it. I kind of gently put it on the fire. It heats up. Condensation starts to stream down the side of this gallon milk jug, which is tightly sealed up. It gets hotter and hotter, but nothing happens. I'm like, hey, I want this thing. I want to put out the fire. What's going on? So I start poking it with a stick. You can see what's happening. I see somebody just kind of going like this in the audience. I poke it with a stick again. Nothing happens. And then, in a move I would later regret, I decide to kick it ever so gently with my foot. And that's all it took for this boiling hot water to explode out of the jug onto my exposed leg. One of the most painful things I've ever experienced. 2nd and 3rd degree burns. And it was an hour to the nearest hospital, and another 2 or 3 hours to get treated, and another 2 or 3 weeks to at least largely recover from this. Never forgot it. I never made that mistake again. But what I can tell you is that since then, I've been camping many times. I've gone to this same lake many times. In fact, my wife and I now have kids, and I've taught them how to camp. I've taught them, and actually others have too, how to build a fire. And we've been safe, and we've taken care of ourselves. We learn through experience, but it's important to try things. And so that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do with an enormous amount of success, but also the occasional situation where you might just get burned. And that, in turn, that sort of thinking led me into a line of work with the Weather Channel, with CNN, where I ran CNN Mobile Worldwide, where I led a small company called News On, which started from nothing, and it turned into one of the top 5 providers of news and information on Roku in less than a year. It was a rocket ship. And I had the privilege of leading Cox Media, which is the advertising division of Cox Communications, one of the largest cable companies in the U.S. And through that time, consistently our teams were both delivering to our customers, but also experimenting and trying things. And we did have outside success. I also saw the distinction between working in a larger company and what it takes to make things happen. And as a CEO of 2 small companies, understanding how I had decision-making capability on the one hand, but I didn't have as many resources. There's a trade-off. And I came to realize that there was a lot of information out there for entrepreneurs, for people who are leading small businesses, and yet I was spending a lot of time with intrapreneurs, people who were driving innovation from the inside, sometimes very quietly, affecting millions, tens of millions of people. And I got to some point about 5 or so years ago, and I said, why isn't there a book about this? Maybe I'm just missing something. And I started looking around, and I kept looking, and I didn't find the one that works for me. There's very little that was written on this topic. There is a pioneering work called Intrapreneurial by Gifford Pinchot. It's a brilliant book. It was written in 1985. And so I started learning more about the concept, and I was like, I want to write a book for this generation. And so I started in November of 2022, started writing. I'd never written a book before. I was happy to get some help from others along the way, but we had a lot of stories to tell. And then I interviewed 33 people who do this kind of work. And I'm happy to say that the book was published on March 12th of this year. You'll see it around you in the seats. It will be published on May the 30th in the UK. And I have 3 goals with this book. The first is to help people to achieve more. I think that one's pretty straightforward. If you do just that, it's probably worth the price of admission. However, to me, that's not enough. Also, it should help us build stronger relationships. Back to the point of building the fire and kicking it a little too early, that was entirely preventable. Didn't need to happen. And what I found is that a lot of people I saw on my teams, and myself, I did it too, we made preventable mistakes. And over time, you learn what's going to happen. And I wanted to write the book because let me tell you something, and I bet just about everybody in this room and on this virtual gathering can share a story. When you're driving change, organizations often resist. Not always, but often resist. And when that happens, that stresses relationships at times. Because someone has a vested interest over here, you have a mission over here, and you're trying to bring the two together. And finally, one of the goals of the book is to increase personal fulfillment. Because if we're achieving more, if you're in Bhutan and you build the system, but it's really difficult to do, and you're protecting data and identity, and you're building stronger relationships, but are you working so hard that you're burned out? I run into too many people in our line of work who are so dedicated to their mission. And oh, by the way, we have responsibilities outside of our organizations with family and the community. It's a lot of work. So how do you take care of yourself and build personal fulfillment at the same time? And to do this through intrapreneurship. So that's why I wrote the book. Okay, so what is intrapreneurship? I gave a heads up on this beforehand. Intrapreneurship is the practice of creating value through innovation and growth within a larger organization. I looked around for different definitions. The one in intrapreneurial is the dreamers who do. I like the definitions, but as I interviewed people, this is what emerged from my research. Intrapreneurship is the practice of creating value. It's not just of experimenting, but it's making things happen that benefit customers and the community through innovation and growth within a larger organization. By the way, I had this conversation last night with someone, larger is intentionally worded. It's not large. This is all relative. This could be a 30-person company or a 100-person company or a 1,000-person company or a 10,000-person organization or more. The point is it's distinguished from being an entrepreneur. And an entrepreneur typically is the owner or founder of an organization. And that person often has a large degree of decision-making capability and control. Whereas the intrapreneur typically does not have the last word, but they have a great idea and the ability to affect change. Okay? So, where can intrapreneurship thrive? It can thrive in a variety of organizations, and not just in the private sector. These include charitable nonprofits, government entities, we have some represented here today, educational institutions. I found this over and over again. Teachers, especially ones who are pushing innovative curricula, find this. Informal community groups, and importantly for today, industry associations. This is where you have a meeting of the minds. The people who are pushing, they're coming from different parts of an area that's important to you to create the future. So how are intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship different? There are several factors, and I boiled it down to 4 for this purpose. First is the size and complexity of the organization. Now, I'm thinking of some large companies around the world that I've worked with, whether it's in the media sector or the mobile technology sector or the wireless carriers or others. And you think about kind of the galactic size of these, goodness knows it's hard to find your way around the hallway, much less how to get things done in the organization. But second, the span of control and influence. If you're in a 100-person company, you might have the ability to find most people you need. If you're in a 1,000-person company or a 10,000-person company, it's very challenging and you're going to need help. Next, the processes used for decision making. How many times have we run into a situation where a process is used to evaluate a new initiative that is actually designed to manage a mature business? Well, you got to get your ROI within 6 months or a year, and you got to hit this amount of revenue, or you're not going anywhere. That's the perfect way to stop innovation. It's important that you differentiate the processes based on the maturity of the initiative that you're championing. And lastly, access to resources of the broader organization. I put this one in because it's easy. By the way, for those of us who have ever felt a little bit of frustration when we felt stifled by whatever it is that was resisting important change, it's easy to forget that you have resources at your disposal. And with these large companies, let me tell you, at CNN, when we decided to go into mobile in a big way, we brought the resources of the organization to this effort, and we rapidly grew into one of the most used apps and one of the most trusted apps around the world in the news space. Importantly, one of these, intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship, they're not derivative of each other. How often have you heard a comment like, what you need to do is to be an entrepreneur inside an organization? Not a bad thought. In fact, it's better than not acknowledging the need. But on the other hand, that statement carries risk, because if you act like an entrepreneur inside a large organization, you will be stopped by a brick wall in about 3 seconds flat. And the reason for that is because if you want to kind of move fast and break things, and if you want to kind of jump right in and say, hey, it's time to do this, let's go 5 minutes from now, what you're going to find is there are lots of vested interest. And they're not all just people who have their heads in the ground, because large organizations also have to manage their own risk. Okay? Entrepreneurs can often move quickly, but they don't necessarily get the benefits of scale. And so each of these is a distinct discipline. So why is intrapreneurship important? You can probably anticipate several of these reasons. Intrapreneurs are critical to sustain success in organizations. By the way, this is an existential crisis in some places. This is not a nice to do. Because intrapreneurs push organizations to adapt. When the rest of the organization is focused, let's say, on producing widgets or making a service work flawlessly, the intrapreneur is working from outside the business and inside the business to make it work well. Next, what emerged from my research is that intrapreneurship trains the next generation of leaders. There's a woman named Leslie who was in what was then known as Turner Broadcasting, and she was in the legal department. And she was just doing her thing, and she was looking at contracts, scouring them, making sure that she was protecting the best interests of the company. And then there was an acquisition, and she got put into an operating role well before she had the skills to do it. And as she told me this story, she said, "Louis, it changed my life." Because I had the opportunity not just to make sure that we were addressing the legal needs of this organization, but I also had the opportunity to learn how a business worked. She eventually became one of the most senior legal leaders and one of the most trusted business advisors in the organization because she had the chance early on. Next, create transformative growth opportunities for entrepreneurs. This, to me, in hindsight, was very clear, but I didn't see it coming when I started writing the book. And the reason for this, I'll give you an example from my personal experience. Several of us will remember this company. There was a company called Third Screen Media in the U.S. when we were creating mobile advertising. Third Screen Media had a great technology. They just needed a place to deploy it. Companies like the Weather Channel, where I worked, and Disney, which owned ESPN at the time, and others, needed an ad technology. We met through the industry. We had lots of conversations. At the Weather Channel, we adopted Third Screen Media to provide our ad technology in the very early days of what was then known as WAP, mobile web, and we eventually grew into apps. And through that, they had a tremendous success in the marketplace, a very successful exit for the entrepreneur Tom, who went on to, I think, spend about a year on a sailboat going somewhere around Spain. And then he came back and did it again because he's a great entrepreneur. And drive value creation within the organization. Small today often is big tomorrow. And it's important to remember that because in these large organizations, often we're taught to value things by what kind of impact they're having today, and we forget about what's coming. But there is a curve of evolution within products and services. Okay, so what are the top characteristics of successful intrapreneurs? I found 5 in this research. The first one, and I wouldn't be surprised if everyone attending here has this in a significant kind of proportion, curiosity. It is impossible, as near as I can tell, I haven't found an exception to this yet, it's impossible to be an intrapreneur successfully within a large organization unless you're curious and you're willing to try things. Next, you have action orientation. It's one thing to go just try things here or there and have experiments, but it's another one to make sure that, hey, we want to do something that matters for this organization, for our customers, for our community. Next, the ability to build bridges. This is a key differentiator. Not all entrepreneurs find this super easy, especially when you look at the different types of people who are involved. Because if you're within a large organization, think about it, you're in the middle. You typically have to manage up to several decision makers. You have to manage laterally to peers, and you also have to manage otherwise within the organization in various directions. But that's not it. You also have to work with your business partners. It's not like you can create a genius product and then just go roll it out with 3 people. You have to work typically with a large number of people. And as if that weren't enough, then you have the industry to work with if you're going to roll it out. Therefore, the ability to have superior communication skills, which we'll talk about more in a minute, is critical. Next, risk tolerance. If you want to play it safe, intrapreneurship is a bad idea. And the reason for that is not everything you try is going to work. If you insist on making straight A's and it just drives you crazy when you get a B in school, maybe this is going to be a bit of a challenge for you unless you develop some adaptation skills. Because some of the things you try as an entrepreneur simply aren't going to work. But conversely, some of the things that you try will work famously well and will change the future of your organization. And optimism. And I want to qualify this, grounded optimism. It's not pie in the sky, hey, everything is beautiful, because let me tell you, it's not. You're going to have some hard days. But if you're grounded in a vision and you understand where you're going, and you say, hey, here's reality, here's what I need to deal with, but I see a future that is better than where we are today, or it's as good but different, that's a really positive thing. And it's very important, based on my research, for entrepreneurs to be successful. I found a total of 16 characteristics. After these 5, I'm not going to go through them all in detail. I'll call out 2 or 3 of them. But there's a list of them. And here we go, from hard work all the way through courage. I'll start with hard work. This isn't really a differentiator. Most entrepreneurs I know are working really hard too. But it is absolutely critical, because there are going to be some long days in addition to hopefully some fun times. High views from the mountaintop and low views from the valley as well. And it takes courage. Every now and again, you have to step up. You have to do something that's not popular because you believe it's important to pursue. And top right, I want to point out the ethical approach. I don't know any entrepreneurs who have been highly successful without valuing truth-telling and promise-keeping. That doesn't mean we're perfect. We're not perfect human beings, but we aspire always to follow guidelines that involve the highest levels of integrity and valuing people along the way. There's more about this in the book. I think everyone will have a copy here, and as we'll discuss later, it's available for purchase at Amazon and other places. But that's not the focus of my talk today. My focus today is on the concepts in the book. Okay, so let's move to making it happen. What does it take to move forward? So first of all, something I want to kind of call out here is building the team. And you start by building intentionally and guided by your goals. Next, imagine sitting at a round table where everyone is equal and they have the ability to add in pivotal ways. Okay, so have you ever been in an organization that is dominated by a certain functional group? The product team drives this organization. Sales is really what makes it happen. Technology makes the world go round. No. The marketing folks, they're the ones who reach the customers, so they drive things. Well, actually, in my experience, it takes all of those and others. And by the way, it is a missed opportunity if you forget about the HR folks who often see things that I didn't see coming. Legal, how often do you look at the legal team and say, oh my gosh, they're getting in the way of my doing X, Y, and Z. And yet often they have insights about how to solve problems. One of the ways that our teams at the Weather Channel were most successful when we were paving new paths was to go talk with our legal folks and say, hey, we have this impasse with, let's say, gosh, I'm thinking of a couple of very interesting conversations we had, but let's say with this very large technology company, they're much bigger than we are, saying, how do we navigate a way through this? And they can craft a way. So if you have an idea, sometimes literally, but generally figuratively, of a round table where everybody's ideas are welcome and they're valued equally, you're going to go farther. Next, valuing differences in team member selection from the beginning. When you're selecting your team, and you start with things like race, gender, and others that are commonly mentioned, but how about, for example, your generation? Do you have people who are younger on the spectrum? Do you have people who have been around for a while and have lots of experience? I find that people can add very important dimensions there. Also, how about introversion and extroversion? Look for these differences that help people to add to the mix. And then providing team members with challenges, development opportunities, and broader exposure. What if this is an opportunity to give your team the opportunity to grow? And then lastly, a team environment that goes beyond transactional needs. There are people in this room today who I've known for over 20 years. We got to know each other early. We already knew what we were doing. We were puppies in the industry. And yet we grew together. We accomplished a lot. We had a little fun along the way. And then here we are. And we have learned a few things. And now we are seeing others succeed, doing our best to help them to succeed. And I can tell you that many of you are teaching me even on this trip today. Next, communicating multidirectionally. So the first thing that you want to look at here is communicating in a timely way to ensure that the right messages get to all necessary parties. This goes back to the idea of having many people in various directions. If you're in a smaller organization and you're kind of working on a skunk works, it doesn't matter so much a lot of the time. But if you have like 100 people, any one of whom can say no, and if they say no, you can't move, then this skill is at a premium. Next, a tailored mix of communication options, including conversations, presentations, what I call quick pings, and offsites. Anybody ever had an offsite that changed the direction of an organization? I have. Now, what happens, however, is that if you have a bad one, it starts the eye rolling. It's like, I got to spend a whole day doing this, and I'm busy. On the other hand, when you take time to step back, which is often hard for entrepreneurs to do because you're right in the middle of it, when you take time to step back, often that's when the breakthroughs come through. And one other point, text messaging is a great idea for quick transactional needs. And it's terrible for resolving complex problems. How often do you say, oh, I just want to go faster, do a few texts, and then maybe you have a mess to clean up? I've seen that. Sometimes I've been the perpetrator of that, and often I've been the person with the mop. You don't want to do that. You want to have a real conversation. It's okay to pick up the phone if you aren't in person in our virtual world. Next, tailor communication to different people and groups using a RACI model. I was taught this by several folks along the way, and I ignored it at my peril, and our teams did. So if you understand who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed, this avoids a lot of problems in a large organization where different people have different expectations. It really helps if you make this explicit. And lastly, practice and model excellent listening skills. So it's really easy when you're convinced that you need to move forward in a certain way. It's really easy to say, okay, I have the answers. I would suggest having a different approach, which is saying, there are a lot of people here who can teach me how to make these answers better. If we do that, if we practice strong listening skills, we're going to go much further. Next, activating the business. This in some ways is the most fun part, but you first have to demonstrate financial and strategic viability because you still have the strategy folks, the financial folks available. Next, iterating while retaining flexibility, keeping the focus on serving customers, and learning from failure to apply these lessons. We've already chatted a little bit about this morning. And I'm going to go on from here, engage in the industry with a service mindset. I was talking with Michael a while back, and the title of the chapter in the book is Engage in the Industry. And he said, please add in there with a service mindset. And I want to use that as an invitation to underscore the importance of contribution. We're not doing this to embellish the resume. We're not doing this to get credit. What we're doing is to contribute. If we keep in mind contribution, which, by the way, Peter Drucker often commented on, that's where we'll accomplish the most. And we can develop knowledge through participation in industry organizations like the MEF, expanding beyond your current network of people, building a stronger ecosystem through your and your organization's participation, distributing responsibilities meaningfully. Once again, this is an opportunity to grow, and using discretion with the volume and types of commitments so that you enable real contribution while maintaining your health. I don't want to miss this last piece. I've been around the block once or twice, and what I find is that sometimes you're getting up early, you're going to that early breakfast meeting, you're going all the way around, you're going to bed late. It's important for us to keep in mind, if we're thinking about the proverbial marathon versus a sprint, to feed health in some way that works for us. So I'd like to finish with 4 quotes. The first is, be thankful for what you have and you'll end up having more. If you concentrate on what you don't have, you will never, ever have enough. Oprah had it right. And I find this quote especially relevant for intrapreneurs because intrapreneurs often, even if we have many resources at our disposal, are kind of, having a conversation on the side saying, oh, can you believe such and such did so and so? Or I just wish we could move faster. It's important to acknowledge those things. But on the other hand, let's remember the assets we have and let's build on the strengths personally and organizationally. Next, Isaac Newton, who lived in the 1600s and 1700s. He was up at Cambridge, not too far away. If I've seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And as we look at identity and data and talk more about it today, let's remember how far we've come and who has built the foundation that we're standing on. Next, a living legend, who, by the way, is associated with Oxford. Data is a precious thing and will last longer than the systems themselves. As we're talking about identity and we're talking about data, let's remember how long it lasts and what our responsibilities are as stewards of this data. And lastly, the great English primatologist who is a member of the World Future Council, who said, what you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of a difference you want to make. So as we're finishing today, for this part of our gathering, what I'd like to do is ask you several questions. The first one is, how can you make a difference in the world of identity and data? And we get to explore that all day long today. Secondly, how can you be a better intrapreneur or support the intrapreneurs you know? And lastly, how can you support your own health and growth while you're doing it along the way? Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much, Louis. We have time for one question. Is there from the audience? Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, and thanks for the presentation. It's Lee Suka from Cinch. I wonder if you explore this idea that there's the idea and there's the organisation and the tension and interplay between them. Is it the right idea for the company?
That is a wonderful question, and actually, in the interest of time, I skipped over a portion of the intrapreneurial journey, and that portion is assessing the ideas, because it is essential that your idea is aligned with the strategy of the organization. Then it's essential that you can be one of the best in the world at it. And so I would strongly support your line of questioning and add there that you're going to end up with essentially a buffet of ideas. And it's important to choose carefully. And one of the ways to do that is by gathering together the round table to assess before you move forward. Thank you for the question.